In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to replace the hard drive in a late 2008 MacBook Pro. This MacBook Pro has seen better days. It's been dropped a couple times, and the hard drive in it is not doing so well. So I'm going to be replacing it with this 2.5-inch SSD. It's an Agility 4, 256 gigabytes. It'll hopefully spark some new life in this laptop and extend its life a little further. So I'm going to be following the guide from iFixit.com, and they have great guides with tons of pictures that guide you through the whole process. So the first step is removing the battery. This thing is pretty easy to do. You just pop that out like that, and I'll set it over here, get it out of the way. The next step is there's a bunch of screws in this area here, so I'm going to get out my trusty 00 screwdriver and start digging away at these screws. Now, it's a good idea to have, for any computer repairs, a set of screwdrivers like this, or these are some various other screwdrivers I've collected over the years, doing Mac and PC, laptop, and desktop repair. And another good idea is for these screws to keep them in order. So these are the ram shield screws. I'm going to set these at the very top up here, and I'm going to go step by step and put the screws in the order that I take them out. And also, just replacing the RAM on here is not that difficult. Newer laptops, except for the MacBook Airs, and the new Retina MacBook Pros are a little harder, but actually impossible. But anyway, this thing is just the RAM shield cover. You pop that out, and that's that. So I'm going to put these screws over here with it to make sure I don't forget them. And I'll move on to the next step, the upper case, which is there's a screw right here and a screw right here. So I'll take these out. And luckily on this laptop, pretty much all the screws are Phillips head. There's a couple that aren't, but that means I can use the same screwdriver for almost everything in here. So again, I'm keeping these in order. So there's the RAM shield, there's the upper case, and next step is a couple screws under the RAM shield, and these are Torx screws. So I actually have a nice, well, this might not be the right size. Yeah, that's too big. I have a couple nice Torx drivers because most of Apple's laptops use this kind of screw, and you should invest in a nice one if you're going to do more than 1 or 2 repairs over your lifetime. And a Torx screw, if you can see that, instead of being 4 little points like that, it's actually like a little star-shaped tool. Kind of like a hex, but it has points in it that help it connect a little better. There's one, and 2. So we have those 2 screws out, and the next ones are the 4 screws on the back edge here. So those are back to the Phillips head. One, 2, 3, and finally 4. Alright, the next step after that is the screws on the port side of the computer. On the side of the computer with more ports. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 on this side. So I'm going to remove these. And the point of removing all these screws is this, they are all holding in actually the top side of the computer, which is where we're going to go after we get all these screws out and pop the top keyboard and trackpad cover off of the computer to get to the innards. It's a little different than newer MacBook Pros where you just pop off the back panel and you have access to everything. Whoops. And the 4th. There's the 4th one. Next, on the back of the computer, there's a couple screws, 1, 2. I need to blow my nose. So 1 and 2. Another thing that I usually do is I work from left to right, just like I read, getting all the screws off. That way when I put them back on, I go right to left. Okay, next is the last of the screws on the side. On the other side, this is the side with the card slot, express card. And there's 4 more here. And of course I just told you that I always go left to right, but I am breaking that rule right now. And I'm going right to left. As long as you keep them in order. And typically nowadays the screws are of the same size. Sometimes back in the old days, like I remember with the PowerBook 180C, there were about 12 or 13 screws on the back, and about 8 of them were different sizes, so you had to get them right, otherwise the computer would not go back together well. Okay, so the next step is to flip the computer over, and I'm going to start removing the top case. So I don't like having this RAM touching the carpet, but I have a nice old towel that I use for these things, and it seems to do the job pretty well. And the hinge on this one is not very good either, so. Alright, to get the case off, you can just start pulling at the edges. And it's all popped in there. Now, I'm going to remove the keyboard. There's a cable here. You got to be careful of this ribbon cable. You want to pop this out, and you really should use a spudger to do this instead of just yanking it. So I'm going to grab my spudger here. The spudger tool is good for evenly pulling off these little cables so you don't snap them or break them. Sometimes if you just pull it, you could rip the cable, and I've actually done that a few times, so learned my lesson. I'm just going to set this back against the screen. You can see that the trackpad's up here, the keyboard's here. On the computer, here's the RAM, some fans, the optical drive. This is where the battery goes, and then there's some other components over here. Now we're interested in removing the hard drive, so we're going to go to the next page on iFixit, and I think the rest of this is pretty simple and typical. Of course it goes to the wrong place on here. Alright, so the next step is taking out the hard drive, and it looks like our cable is up here, this guy right here. So I'm going to again use the spudger, pop him off. Be careful not to try to touch any of these other circuits too much. And also this cable is stuck on here pretty tightly, so you want to be careful in pulling that off. And then there's a couple screws that we're going to need to take out over here. And I'm also going to need to remove this cable at some point here, but not quite yet. So I'm going to take my Torx driver again. And there's a couple Torx screws here. There's one up here. And for these screws, I'm going to set them separate because they have to do with the internal and the hard drive. I'm just going to leave them here so that I can remember where they went. And these are a little bit tighter than the rest, and a little longer. That's the time it takes to get these out. So there's those two, and then you can take this part out. It's basically just holding the drive in. So that's that guy. And now I should be able to pop this drive right out. Let me see what they say. Okay, so this cable does need to pop off of here, so I'm going to use the spudger again. Again, you want to work really slowly and be careful not to damage this cable, because you don't want to have to go online and buy a replacement. And it is really glued on here. Man, that is tight. Usually the cables are not glued on quite so tightly. but in this case it is, and I don't want to damage it. So I'm trying to be careful, but otherwise the sleep light is not going to work anymore. Alright, almost there. There we go. And okay. Now we should be able to pry this guy out of here. Hold on, gotta pull these out and pop this guy right off of here. Okay, so now we have this drive out. I'm gonna save that tape. Next, we need to remove all these little screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, and transfer them to the new drive. But to save my orientation, I'm gonna pull this guy right away so I don't lose where I am. And now another thing to make sure of is that the drive is no higher than 9.5 millimeters, and this one looks like it'll fit just in there. So now I want to keep these in the same orientation so I can plug them back in, but transfer the screws from the old to the new. So I'm going to take this old one and grab these two side screws off. Okay, I had to pause for a moment there. But I'm still transferring these 4 screws from the old drive to the new drive, and they are giving me a little bit of a time here. Just trying to get them off. There, no. There we go. So I got 1 and 2. And these screws are a little bit tougher to get out than most of the rest have been. I wonder if this hard drive's been replaced before, I'm not sure. Okay, so I got 2 there, and I'm going to put them straight into here before I forget where they were and the orientation. And if I can get this to actually go in, goodness gracious. I'm not having a good day with my depth perception. Come on. There we go. And the second one. Okay, there's one in all the way. And I'm getting the second one in there. Goodness. Maybe I need a new driver. This one might be stripping a little bit. Alright, so there's those 2. Now I need to do the other side, which should be the same 2 screws without the rubber bumpers, which means it's a little bit easier to see the threads. Okay, got that one out. And what kind of it's a 200 gig. I didn't know they had a 200 gig even. This old drive. This is original, so it hasn't been replaced. And it says August 2008. Oops. Alright, so that's our old drive. We don't need to use it anymore. I'll put these new screws into the new drive. And one started, the other one. These are annoying. Okay, so we got those 2 screws. Alright, those are in. Now I'm going to plug this drive in. This will probably be the last time anybody ever does this to this computer, but who knows, maybe not. Alright, so those guys are in. Now the next step is I need to re-stick this guy on here. I'm not going to do it with tons of pressure because if somebody else ever has to do this, I don't want them to go through all the same annoyance that I did. And then I need to put this down This again just pushes down the drive and keeps it cushioned against the those rubber bumpers. And then I need to put these screws in. There's one. And when I'm putting screws back in, I usually try to get them all in first, and then I tighten them. That way, if you need to adjust the position of what you're putting in, you can still do that before you tighten the screws all the way. So there's those two, and I'll put this tape back down. I don't like that corner right there. Looks like that's already been wearing thin a little bit, but that's how it was, so I'm going to leave it that way. Then I need to plug this back in, the hard drive connector. And that just pops right in there. And this will stick back on there a little bit. Now we're just going to go back in reverse of pretty much everything we just did. So first, I'm going to take this top cover, plug it back in on the motherboard there. And it seems that that's in correctly. And then on the top cover, you gotta kind of work it down, and it should push down flush everywhere. I like just giving it a good push everywhere just to make sure that it's all matched up. Feel around the edges. Now I'm going to close it, and we're going to start working in reverse. So I need to get out my iFixit again and go back through. So I got the top cover, got these 4 screws. So I'm going to take my Phillips again. And like I said, I work right to left when I'm putting things back on, typically. So I got one. And of course it's harder to get back in for some reason. And for these screws, I can tighten them down because they're pretty well aligned. But for parts that flop around, when you put them back on and there's multiple screws, make sure you don't tighten them all as you go along, but at the end, after they're all in. 1, 2, 3. Oops. 3 and 4. And then next is the ones on the back. It's got one on each side of the hinge. So you got 1. And 2. Next we'll do the other side, the ports. So I got 1. 2. Oops. 3. And 4. Make sure you don't lose one of these screws inside one of the ports. That would be interesting. And then I'll go to the back side of the computer again. These are the long ones. 1. Actually, I think these were the other way around. It shouldn't matter, but I like doing it back in the same way that I took them out. Sometimes you can also end up stripping one of these screw holes in the computer if you put in the wrong screw in the wrong place. I've had that happen a few times, and typically when that happens, I just leave that screw out and hope for the best. But if it were a customer's computer, I would find a replacement screw, because it's no fun having loose parts on a laptop. Alright, so those 4 are in. And I got the front, these 2 up here. And these are not those 2. I don't think. These look like these two, actually. Oh, I must have missed them. Yeah, I missed them in the last step. Oops. Oh, and those are... These guys are not Phillips. Okay, and then back to these two. Little itty bitty guys again. Come on. Ooh, those are little. I don't like tightening them too hard. Don't want to strip them. Not these itty bitty ones, at least. And I'm probably hitting the microphone right now, aren't I? Sorry about that. Okay, and the final part is the RAM cover. So you got 3 guys here. Yeah, the new MacBook Pros, the aluminum enclosures are a little bit nicer than this to work on. Not quite as many screws. Of course, the Retina ones, those are pretty painful to work on and you can't do much inside of them. I guess these go in like that. Batteries. When's the last time I've replaced a battery? Okay. So when we're all done, the reward is turning on the computer. And I don't think that it'll boot because I don't think this has macOS 10 on it. But at least we'll know that it works if it lights up. Wow, that's a smudgy screen. And of course with the new drive, there's no more moving parts inside of here except for the fans and the optical drive, which will make this a much more reliable computer, which is nice. And yeah, so it's not finding the boot volume because there is none. Because this guy is the guy that has OS 10 on it. You can see the question mark there. So that is how you do it. I'm going to turn this off and close it up. And now we have a new SSD in this old MacBook Pro.